For the fourth consecutive season, it appears that the Baltimore Ravens have ended with some level of disappointment in their season. Obviously, the 2019 team with Lamar Jackson losing to the Titans, 2020's team ending with Lamar Jackson throwing a pick six against the Buffalo Bills in the divisional round. 2021, an injury-plagued season with two missed two-point conversions leads to them missing the playoffs. And this year, in a game that nobody thought Baltimore could win, the Ravens played incredibly well against the Cincinnati Bengals, only to watch their incredible performance evaporate with another 100 yards of the opposing defense running in the other direction. As the Cincinnati Bengals beat the Baltimore Ravens, J.K. Dobbins had some interesting comments coming out of that game in which he talked about had Lamar Jackson been in the game at the goal line, they would have tucked and run, maybe pushing with the fullback to try and get him in the end zone. And then saying ultimately, if we had Lamar, we would have won the game. And it's hard to argue with him. Baltimore's defense essentially held the Bengals to 17 points for most of the game. The Ravens scored 2 touchdowns in the red zone with Tyler Huntley. So with all of the questions about Lamar Jackson's health, with all of the questions about Lamar Jackson's availability, Juju, has Lamar Jackson played his final game with the Baltimore Ravens?
I'm inclined to say no, only because I don't think the Ravens are a bad organization. And I feel as though moving on from Lamar Jackson would be something that a bad organization would do. Now, I do look at the Ravens situation and give them the benefit of the doubt in the sense that I feel like they're offering good contracts to Lamar Jackson. Now, I get it. He wants to try and go for this fully guaranteed deal, especially after the Deshaun Watson deal got passed. But I still feel as though, knowing that he's going to be one of the top highest paid quarterbacks in the league, I think top 3 contract when that deal is signed to ink, I still feel like it's a fair contract either way. I can understand the hesitation from the Ravens and not wanting to do a fully guaranteed contract, especially when you consider that Lamar's injuries the last 2 years have basically ended their seasons by him not being on the field. And we just know that his best asset is going to be his running ability. Not saying that he's a shabby passer, but we know just how elite he is with his legs. So I'm going to say no. I feel like they'll figure something out. I don't know if it's going to be the type of deal where both sides are leaving the negotiating table feeling like they lost something, which is usually the best case for everyone.
I can understand that. And the thing that I will also give Baltimore the benefit of the doubt on is 2020 and 2021, they had just a catastrophic number of injuries. I mean, Lamar Jackson aside to end the season, in 2021, Baltimore had the second largest percentage of their salary cap go on IR. I think only the Man Campbell Lions had a higher percentage. And then in 2020, they lose Ronnie Stanley. Obviously, they've dealt with all those injuries that I mean, they still managed to be the number 5 seed, and the other team was that Steelers team that we all know was frauds. So like they were still one of the 3 best teams in the NFC, in the AFC. So I give them the benefit of the doubt on the injuries. And ultimately, I think what's going to be difficult for them is how they rebuild the roster around Lamar Jackson. Now, I will say, everyone being dumb and allowing them to get Kyle Hamilton with the number 14 pick, who is probably going to be a Hall of Famer. I know he's a rookie. He made All-Pro as a rookie. Our friend Blake Jude had him as his number 2 graded prospect in the entire class last year. He's a stud. He's on Baltimore. They do good things when you give them talented players. So drafting a generational safety like Kyle Hamilton will help once Lamar Jackson gets that big contract that I assume he's going to get. And besides the point of like contract negotiations or what they think Lamar Jackson is worth, ultimately they're going to get a deal done. I suspect it will be done this year. I just don't see them going into camp wanting to do the whole franchise tag thing. It just seems like a bad idea for all parties involved, especially if Lamar Jackson, Geno Smith, and Daniel Jones are all going to be on the franchise tag. Like, that's not sending a good signal. I imagine they'll get a long-term deal done, kind of like what happened after Dak Prescott broke his leg in 2020 and the Cowboys guaranteed him $160 million. I suspect something similar is going to happen with Lamar Jackson over these next few months.
Now, do you feel as though their Super Bowl window still remains open even after you give Lamar a long-term deal? Because we're looking at this AFC. This AFC is loaded, top to bottom, especially at quarterback talent. We know that they've had struggles against the Chiefs. We've seen they have a competitive matchup right now against the Bengals. They could go either way The Bills seem to have somewhat of their number as well. And then we're starting to see this Jaguars team come up. We're starting to see what could potentially be from this Chargers. What do you think of the Ravens long term?
So long term, by having Lamar Jackson on your team, you are good enough to make the playoffs every year. And I want to be careful when I say that, because I said the same thing about the Arizona Cardinals last year when they gave Kyler Murray an extension. So I want to be careful and acknowledge things can go very poorly, but as long as you give Lamar Jackson stability, you can make the playoffs every single year. Now, will it be good enough to beat Kansas City? Will it be good enough to beat Buffalo? As currently constructed, I think the answer is no. I thought even if Baltimore had a fully healthy Lamar Jackson this year, had they gotten to Buffalo or had they gotten to Kansas City, they probably would have lost in the second round of the playoffs. But making the second round of the playoffs in the AFC pretty consistently is a really hard thing to do. I mean, that's incredibly successful because of the teams that you're trying to compete with. I mean, Kansas City theoretically is about to host their 5th consecutive AFC championship game. Like, it's really hard to reach that standard. So I would say Baltimore's best chance to win a championship has passed them by. 2019 was obviously their best season. They could have hosted the AFC championship game, but having Lamar Jackson on your team should be good enough to get you to the playoffs every single year for the next 4 to 5 years. I think a good comp for them is what the Seattle Seahawks were in the post Legion of Boom era, where they won 60 regular season games in 6 years, which is an average of 10 a season, but they never made the NFC championship game. I think that's the best comp for Baltimore as currently constructed, but they can make a couple of switches and turn this thing around. I think drafting Kyle Hamilton is a great first step because he looks like a generational talent at the safety position. So I think that's a great step to finding value as Lamar Jackson's about to make $40 million a year.
Are you at all worried about John Harbaugh? And I ask that because, okay, before Lamar became the full-time star for the Ravens, John Harbaugh was a little bit on the hot seat. Seems crazy for a Super Bowl winning head coach to become a hot seat head coach as fast as he did, but it happened. People started questioning his judgment. Now, fast forward to last year, you mentioned there was a couple games in which they arguably lost because of decisions that John Harbaugh made in the games. Then you go to this year, and as soon as Lamar Jackson gets hurt, what value was John Harbaugh adding to the Ravens? You could say he gave them a tenacity to come out in that game against the Bengals, and they played their ass off even with Tyler Huntley. But the decision to try and jump over the goal line, maybe that was a Greg Roman call. Maybe that was a John Harbaugh call. What do you think of his future with Baltimore?
So John Harbaugh is one of the 7 to 8 coaches, depending on how you feel about Sean Payton, one of the 7 to 8 coaches where once you've got him, you're not really eager to let him go. So I don't think Baltimore is going to be pushing John Harbaugh out the door. The thing that I would understand is if Harbaugh wants to leave on his own accord. I mean, he's been at that job for 15 years. I could understand not necessarily a mutual parting of ways, but if the Ravens are kind of asking him how he feels about his future, if Harbaugh wants to retire or Harbaugh wants to step away, I would understand that more. I don't think Baltimore's eager to push him out the door. I think they kind of know what they have with Harbaugh, because now we've seen him do it with like multiple iterations of this team. We've seen him do it with the Joe Flacco, Ray Lewis, Ed Reed teams. We've seen him do it with the in-between period where Flacco was still the quarterback, but they were bringing in all of those linebacking pieces and revamping the defensive line with Calais Campbell. And then they bring in Lamar in 2018 and they totally reinvent their offense. It's one of the greatest coaching jobs I've ever seen, is them just totally pivoting and reinventing their offense. But
at the end of the day, doesn't that still result in one playoff win in 5 years, if not longer?
Yeah, I think that's a little bit misleading because they've been in the playoffs 3 of the last 4 years, and had Lamar been healthy, they would have been there. And
yeah, but Marvin Lewis too went to the playoffs a bunch of times, but after enough one and dones, the Bengals decided to cut bait. And John always is going to have that Super Bowl ring to lord over the organization and say, hey, only 2 coaches to get you one of these. I get to stay here as long as I want. I get that. I understand the hesitancy, move on. But at the same time, if you're just standing stuck in neutral, if you're just standing in quicksand, you're not really advancing the organization. And I respect what John Harbaugh is as a CEO head coach, but some would argue, wouldn't it be better to get someone who's an actual play caller in there if you want to try and take a next step?
What is the next step from John Harbaugh, though? I mean, so
Well,
the thing that
the next step is someone that you think can help you win a Super Bowl. And at least in this iteration, you mentioned getting it done. What is getting it done? Just making it to the playoffs? Are you happy being a first round exit? If that's what your goal is as the organization, okay, that's fine. But I don't think fans will necessarily stand behind that, especially because you've been an organization that in the last 20 years has shown that you can win Super Bowls. Was that strictly linked to Ray Lewis, or is it going to be John Harbaugh who can lead them to their next Super Bowl?
Well, I think it'll be Lamar Jackson who leads them to their next Super Bowl, if that's going to happen. The thing that's difficult with that is I think John Harbaugh gives you the best chance realistically to win the Super Bowl. Like, I think he's one of those 8 indispensable coaches. And I will say the thing that might change my mind on this is if he has multiple Sean McVay seasons like last year, like if they go 6-11 and 7-10, I think the tide will start to shift a little bit. I mean, part of the reason why Harbaugh was potentially on his way out the door was because in 2000, it was either 2015 or 2016, they went 5-11, and that was the season that allowed them to draft Ronnie Stanley with, I think, the 6th pick in the draft. So he had that 5-11 season, and then they started out, I think it was 2 years later, going 2-5 or 2-6 right before Lamar Jackson took over. Yeah. So I think he had those 2 not great seasons that were kind of pushing him in that direction.
I always had this debate with my dad about former Angels manager Mike Scioscia. Yes, Mike Scioscia, respect him for his ability to win that World Series for the Angels when he did in 2002, 2003, I forget at this point. But at a certain point, it started to just become, are you just kind of a placeholder? Has this organization topped out? I feel as though sometimes change is good for everyone. Andy Reid even kind of maxed out in Philly. I think John Harbaugh, he might have reached the point where he's maxed out there. Now, I will say in something in Harbaugh's favor, there's not many coaches, especially when you start going into alternative coaching selections, that would be so willing to adjust their entire play style like Harbaugh was willing to do when they got Lamar Jackson in that building and when he officially took over the reins at starting quarterback. Now, if you can find someone that also is willing to work with the play style that Lamar Jackson and the talent you have on this roster demands, that's going to be another challenge, because I don't think you just get any coach to come in here and work with the current offensive personnel you have. It's a very specific personnel that this organization has built that's mostly catered to what Lamar Jackson does best. Who's that alternative selection? I don't know. There's not one that comes off the mind. Who else is running this style of football?
Bobby Petrino. Go get Bobby Petrino.
What, so he can leave a note in the locker room and say, hey guys, I'm sorry, but I'm taking the Arkansas job or whatever it was when he left.
Yeah, no, that Bobby Petrino did do that as an NFL head coach. Make him offensive coordinator. Let's not make him a head coach. Let's make him offensive coordinator of the Ravens, and maybe they'll work out from there. But
hire whoever the Navy head coach is, run the wishbone.
Ken Niumatalolo. He just got fired, so he's available right now. If you wanna go get Ken Niumatalolo. The thing that's interesting about John Harbaugh is the fact that he did pivot, and the fact that it's one of the most amazing coaching jobs I've ever seen is their ability to have the flexibility to pivot once they built an offense around Lamar Jackson. And they've made the playoffs 4 times in the last 5 years. I know we set the expectations at taking the next step and all of that. I don't want to underestimate just how difficult that is. And had they converted 2 2-point conversions last year, because remember they had the 2 2-point conversions when they could have kicked to go to overtime, but they chose to go for 2 and didn't get it. If those 2 plays hit when Lamar Jackson gets hurt last year, they're the number 1 seed in the AFC. So the year they didn't make the playoffs, they were almost number 1 seed in the AFC. So to that point, I know we're talking about taking the next step and all of that. I don't want to underestimate just how hard it is to make the playoffs 4 times in 5 years and make the divisional playoff twice and put together what I consider to be the most unbeatable team I've ever seen in that 2019 Ravens team. I don't want to undersell just how difficult that is in the NFL.
Unbeatable until you hit Derrick Henry.
Well, yeah, it was at the time, it was the most unbeatable team. It was the most unbeatable team I'd seen until they got beat by the Titans. But regular season, it was the most unbeatable team I've ever seen.
Niners should have got him too. There was a bad call, if I recall, but
yeah, Tucker last second field goal. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's okay though. They were amazing. And so I don't want to poo-poo like, oh, they can just go find another Harbaugh. Like, I think that the key to taking the next step for the Ravens is going to be with the general manager and with personnel. It is, how do you hit on those draft picks? You traded Hollywood Brown for a first round pick. Like, is that going to be a mistake? Are you going to be able to find another receiver? They've done great with the defense, pivoting to Patrick Queen and Kyle Hamilton. They've done an amazing job with the defense. It's just, I think personnel, once Lamar's going to make $40 million, got to find value in the margins. So I think personnel and general manager is going to be the person we should hold more accountable in this situation.
Okay, Kyle, I'm going to make you an NFL script writer for a day. If Lamar is not a Raven next year, which team would be the best team to see Lamar end up in?
Ooh, that's a great question. This one might be a little bit out there. I'm going to go Philadelphia. I know they have a guy who already does something similar in Jalen Hurts. But if you gave Nick Sirianni Lamar Jackson and catered that offense, we might get back to seeing MVP Lamar Jackson again. I mean, Jalen Hurts is going to finish top 4 in the MVP this year. I would love to see him play on Philadelphia. Not that it's going to happen, but I would love to watch Lamar Jackson on the Eagles.
I'm going to throw out a New York team, but not the New York team that many would suspect. I'm going to say the Giants. I think if we consider Lamar a upgraded Daniel Jones, what Daboll would be able to do. And I feel as though the style of offense that the Giants are already running, we talked about coaches that actually cater to the needs of a quarterback like Lamar Jackson with his skill set. It seems like Daboll is doing that in New York with a slightly lesser talent. And hey, credit to Daniel Jones this year. I think he's worthy of an extension. But if there was the opportunity in play to get Lamar, I think that you should do it if you're them. The Jets, close second for me. I feel as though the Jets are close. They have so many great weapons and personnel.
I have a second team too, if you want to get that in there. But because you brought up the Jets, Seattle would be fun. Seattle would be really fun to watch.
I just don't know if that makes them a contender. Like, I'm talking about these teams with the Giants and Jets. I feel as though if they got Lamar, they feel like a quarterback away kind of team. I feel like the Seattle Seahawks still have a ways to go. Maybe their guys level up, though. They drafted really well. They still have draft picks to come. So maybe the Seahawks, they could change that if they were able to end up with Lamar. But anyway, guys, let us know in the comment section. We covered a lot of ground here. Do you think Lamar signs that contract with the Ravens? If he doesn't sign that contract, which team would you like to see him end up with? Do you think that John Harbaugh has come to the end of his rope with the Baltimore Ravens organization or has peaked in that organization? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Anyway, guys, leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on social media at SlumpBusterPod, at SlumpBusterPodcast. From Juju and Kyle, stay safe, happy, and healthy. We will see you next time.